So, Professor Jiang, recently you and I were having a private discussion about the war in Iran, and we were exchanging ideas that essentially came down to whether or not there was a method to Trump's madness in the Strait of Hormuz. So, I'll quickly recap, and then hopefully you can also elaborate and provide more information, background, and context. But we were discussing the ideas of, on one side, Brian Berletic and Medhurst, who have similar ideas but focus on different details. And then on the other side, the majority of analysts who essentially see this war as lost, that Trump has failed.
Yes.
And it was an impulsive decision done mostly on behalf of the Zionists because they own or control him.
Yes.
And this war is basically over. And it's just the difficult responsibility of Trump to accept that reality. But Brian Berletic and Medhurst argue that actually this war is not over, it's incomplete, and it does meet some of the empire's strategic needs. And so we discussed this concept of strategic sequencing, which I'll ask you to explain to the audience here in a moment.
Yeah.
But essentially the idea that Iran fits into this global imperial plan for the United States to either delay the decline or reestablish its hegemony moving forward. And then on the other hand, there's this whole idea about, whether the United States is essentially closing Hormuz to physically remove competition in the energy market, the way that they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline with the Russia-Ukraine war. So could you just briefly explain to the audience what strategic sequencing is, and then share your thoughts with me again, this time for the audience to hear, about whether you think there is a method to the madness, whether it's working or not, and how you ultimately see the war.
Right. So the idea of strategic sequencing was first proposed by Elbridge Colby, who is now basically CENTCOM at the War Department. He's under Peter Hegseth. But basically the idea is the United States sees China as its main competitor in the 21st century. But right now, it is too hard to take on China directly. So you sequence the fight. And so the idea is you first take on Iran. And if you do that, then you cut off China's energy supply from the Middle East. And then you deal with China. So that's the idea of strategic sequencing. And, Richard Medhurst, not only does he believe this war is incomplete, but he believes this war is going according to plan. And basically the plan is that the way that the empire can exert itself in the 21st century is by controlling the world's maritime choke points. So you either control access or you deny access. And so we're seeing that already where Trump is exerting control over the Panama Canal, over the Arctic Circle, over the Cape of Good Hope, over the Strait of Malacca, over the Strait of Gibraltar. And he's denied access in both the Strait of Hormuz and the Strait of Bab el-Mandab. So that's the idea behind Richard Medhurst's thinking. And his argument is that when you do that, you control the world's oil flow, because either nation states like China and Japan need to ask permission from the United States to access oil, or they need to buy the oil directly from the United States. Because as this war in the Middle East rages, the only supplier of oil, cheap energy, are now Russia and the Western Hemisphere. As we know, there's this war going on in Ukraine, and Zelensky and the Ukrainians are now targeting Russian oil refineries. So the only long-term stable source of cheap energy now is basically the Western Hemisphere, specifically North America, Canada, United States, and Mexico. So Richard Medhurst believes this is the grand plan, and this is the way that the empire can maintain its hegemony in the 21st century. And Brian Berletic would also agree with this. There are certain problems with this. Okay, the first problem is there is a much neater way the empire can exert its hegemony, and it's primarily through trade. So right now, Russia and Iran and North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, these nations are outside Pax Americana, what we call the global trade system. So a much neater way of for the empire to assert its hegemony is by bringing them in to Pax Americana, and specifically Iran. So that was the very point of the JCPOA, where Obama was negotiating this nuclear deal with Iran in order to seek detente with Iran in order to bring Iranian oil back into the global economy. And this is the way that most empires have behaved throughout history. One data point that is very confusing is the 2003 Iraq War. If the United States believed that Iran would be a future threat, why attack Iraq, right? Why destroy Iraq? Because for the past 50 years, Iraq and Iran bounced each other out. And this was most obvious during the Iran-Iraq War, a devastating war that lasted almost 10 years, that killed millions of Iranians and Iraqis. And so these two powers bounced each other out. So it made absolutely no sense for the Americans to attack Iraq. In fact, Saddam Hussein refused to believe that the Americans would attack because it made absolutely no sense to him. For many years, Saddam Hussein was actually a client of the United States. It was the United States who supported Saddam Hussein during the Iraq-Iran war. And he believed that it made absolutely no sense for the Americans to destroy his regime because then you make Iran the regional power. And why would the Americans do that? Right? So that's the first issue I have with this. From a historical perspective, the American strategy doesn't really make much sense. You're much better off co-opting your enemies rather than attacking your enemies. And that's number one. Number two is it assumes a level of cool-headedness, strategic thinking that I think that empires in decline lack. What we know is that empires in decline, they tend to be very arrogant. They tend to be very insular. They have a lot of hubris. And so they tend to overestimate their capacity and they underestimate their enemies. And the very idea of strategic sequencing, the very idea that this is all being calculated very strategically, defies reporting on the issue. So, for example, it's been reported by many different media outlets that on the onset of the war, Trump believed that decapitation would work just as it worked in Venezuela, right? So on January 3rd, the special forces went in and kidnapped Maduro, that decapitated the regime, and now the United States is able to control Venezuela. Venezuela recently announced they were withdrawing from the ICC, the National Criminal Court, and that was clearly at the behest of Zionists. And so Trump really believed that if you kill the Ayatollah, then Iran would surrender or at least break down into civil war. That didn't happen. Trump did not know that the Iranians would close off the Strait of Hormuz and that they would attack the GCC energy infrastructure. He didn't know any of this, even though everyone else did. So we're assuming a level of clear-sighted strategic thinking that doesn't really exist in a Trump White House. That's problem number two. Problem number three is this war has gone very badly for the United States. I predicted that this war would happen, and I failed to see how badly this war is impacting the United States. And so Richard Medhurst is correct in saying, yes, now the United States has a monopoly over oil supply, but there's a bigger problem, and it's the US dollar. So what's been happening is that the Japanese yen is under threat. The Japanese yen has been sinking because speculators rightly assume that Japan, having lost the GCC energy supply, the economy is in for a tough time, and so they're speculating against the Japanese yen. Why is this a problem? The problem is both the GCC and Japan provide liquidity to the global economy. So the idea is that Japan takes its excess savings and invests it in in the global economy, specifically the United States. So Japan has $1.1 trillion in U.S. treasuries. And because their currency is sinking, they have no choice but now to repatriate a lot of their money in order to save their own currency. And so, yes, you do gain control over the world's oil supply, but at the cost of the global economy. The global economy is now being destroyed. And what analysts estimate is, okay, um, with the GCC and Japan no longer able to buy U.S. treasuries, no longer able to invest in the U.S. economy, you're going to have the entire U.S. economy collapse very soon, right? So there are two major bubbles in the United States right now. There's the AI bubble, and there's the private credit bubble. The private credit bubble is $2 trillion. The AI bubble is much more significant. When these bubbles burst, you're going to have possibly tens of thousands, possibly even millions of jobs being lost in the United States, primarily white-collar workers. This is the white-collar apocalypse. If you've been following the news, it's already happening. A lot of people are getting laid off. So these are the three issues that I have with this meta thesis. I'll summarize for you. Number one is, if you want to maintain global imperial hegemony, you're better off co-opting your enemies rather than attacking your enemies. It just was a much more clear-headed, much more strategic, much more cost-effective way of maintaining an empire. That's number one. Number two is empires in decline usually do not think strategically. And number three is the global economy is being imploded right now.
The takeaway for me is that it's a lot more complicated than simply the U.S. empire reestablishing its hegemony or delaying its decline solely through the energy market. The idea I have is, though, Japan may have to think about what to do with U.S. treasuries and all this investment they have in the U.S. economy. But at the same time, if the U.S. now becomes the dominant energy market, don't countries then need to purchase oil using the U.S. dollar? So there's a bit of an offset. Like the U.S. dollar is damaged in the process because of the treasuries, but then at the same time, you have to accumulate dollars to purchase the energy, correct?
Yeah, okay, so that's correct, but there's a problem here. And what you are missing out is demand destruction. Okay, and the idea is, yes, they want a lot of oil because their economies have a lot of demand for oil. But if people are no longer able to afford anything, they don't want oil anymore, right? Now that now that cut back costs, and this will be a long-term thing. Okay, right now the world is extremely consumeristic. People want to drive SUVs. They want air conditioning. They want to fly overseas for vacations. They want iPhones, and this is all very energy intensive. And that's why there's this huge demand for oil. But what we know is humans can change. So if you lose half your income or you're unemployed, will you cut back on your spending? You don't take vacations anymore. You don't buy the SUV. You walk or you take the subway. You turn off the air conditioning, right? This is demand destruction. So yes, it is true that Japan may become more reliant on the United States for its energy needs. At the same time, Japan will probably cut back on its energy demand as well. So in the long term, this is bad for the United States.
Interesting. So consumption goes down, therefore productivity goes down, therefore you need to buy oil using the dollar, but you're not buying as much of it.
That's right.
Yeah, it's an interesting argument there.
And most economists wouldn't make this argument. And most economists, I have not seen any economists say this is a good thing for the United States.
So there are a lot of people around Trump who are accelerationists.
Yeah.
You have the AI tech guys, and then you have the Zionists.
Right.
And they benefit from accelerationism, no?
Right, okay, so I think this is a much more better argument. Okay, if you say that this war is meant to slow down imperial decline, that I don't think makes much sense. But if you say to me this war is about to accelerate imperial decline, that makes a lot more sense to me.
Why?
Because if you go back and you study how the United States has been behaving for the past 20 years, there's a clear pattern of trying to implode the American empire and trying to promote Israeli interests in the Middle East. This goes back to the 1996 Clean Break Memo. I'm not sure if you know what the Clean Break Memo is.
If you could just explain it for the audience.
It was a response to the Oslo peace process. And the Oslo peace process was promoted by Bill Clinton, as well as Isaac Rabin in Israel, the Prime Minister of Israel. And what they believed is the Israel-Arab conflict in the Middle East was not sustainable for both sides in the long term. If Israel were to achieve long-term security, it needed to resolve the Palestinian issue, which was a main source of friction between the Arab nations and Israel. And so they were trying to come up with a two-state solution. And a lot of the thinking underlying the Oslo peace process is neoliberalism, meaning that once we establish peace, then we can trade with each other. And once you trade with each other, that establishes linkages that ensure long-term stability and security. Okay, that was the thinking behind the Oslo peace process. And this stopped when Isaac Rabin was assassinated in November 1995. And then Netanyahu comes into power, and he assembles a study group led by two individuals, Douglas Feith and Richard Pearl. And what they proposed was something called a Clean Break Memo. And there were three main pillars to the strategy that they proposed to Netanyahu. The first is that Israel needed to become a much more open, private, high-tech economy. Because at this point, Israel was a socialist society. And they said, screw socialism, let's go with neoliberalism, let's open up the economy, let's privatize the economy, let's move towards high tech. And in that regard, Israel has followed this path, okay? That's number one. Number two is the idea, so what they said is, the idea of peace in the Middle East is retarded. It will never work because the Arabs will always hate the Israelis. So what you want to do is establish balance of power. You basically want to create a situation where Israel is able to divide and rule the entire Middle East. So what you do is you regime change Iraq and you regime change Syria. And what it called for was to work with Turkey to break Syria up into two and to overthrow the Assad regime. And you do that throughout the Middle East. So you divide and conquer the Middle East. Okay, that's number two. Number three is the Palestinian issue cannot be resolved through compromise. If you give them land, they'll only ask for more. So what you do is you establish peace through strength. Those were the exact words, peace through strength. So you beat the crap out of them, and then they respect you because, quite honestly, they're animals and they only understand power. Okay, so those are the three main recommendations in the Clean Break Memo established by Richard Pearl and Douglas Feith. Now, if you look at what's happened in the Middle East since then, that the memo has been completely implemented. Okay, but what's important to understand is it's been implemented across both Republican and Democratic administrations. So it was George W. Bush that regime changed Iraq, but it was Obama that regime changed Libya and Syria, or tried to regime change Syria. Okay, so there's some really important things we have to recognize about this memo. First of all, the two chief architects, Douglas Feith and Richard Pearl, went on to the Bush administration, and along with Paul Wolfowitz, they were the chief architects of the Iraq War. So the memo that they wrote to Netanyahu, they themselves went on to implement. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two is, after 9/11, Wesley Clark, a U.S. general, appears with Amy Goodman on stage. Have you seen this video?
Yeah.
Okay. And he says that the Pentagon, in response to 9/11, wants to regime change 7 nations in 5 years, and they include Iraq, Libya, Syria, Lebanon, Sudan, Somalia, and those 6 have already been done. And there's one more, and that's Iran. So there's a clear pattern being established here. So for people to say, oh, this was just done at the whim of Trump, Yeah, but then why do we have these two data points? The Clean Break Memo, which calls for exactly what's happening in the Middle East, balance of power, regime change, and peace through strength. And why did we know Wesley Clark say the plan always has been to regime change these seven nations? The last nation is Iran. Um, and so there's a clear pattern here.
So this goes back to your initial idea that maybe the intention is to implode the empire. So how does the Clean Break Memo fit into this process of imploding the empire or accelerating the decline of it?
So the Clean Break Memo is essentially the Greater Israel Project. And the idea of the Greater Israel Project is for Israel to assert dominance over the Middle East. Now, the main force that prevents the Greater Israel Project from being achieved is not Iran. Iran is not even part of the Greater Israel Project, okay? The idea of the Greater Israel Project is that Israel will achieve the biblical lands, which extends from the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates in Iraq. And so if you look at the flag of Israel, there are two blue lines, right? Well, that's the Nile and the Euphrates, and the Star of David is in between. Okay, that's the Great Israel Project. Iran is not part of that. That's Persia, right? So that's the Great Israel Project. But the main constraint to Great Israel Project is actually the United States. Why? Because the United States has defense commitments in the GCC, which is the base of the petrodollar, right? Remember, Richard Nixon goes to Saudi Arabia and establishes a petrodollar. And in return for Saudi Arabia selling oil in US dollars, the United States must guarantee the security and safety of Saudi Arabia. But that goes against the Greater Israel Project. So the petrodollar is in the national interest of the United States. The Greater Israel Project goes against the national interests of the United States. And if there's a conflict, what do? You implode the empire so that Israel can become dominant. It wants to be the new empire. It wants to replace the United States and have control over the Middle East. That's the intention here.
And they want the U.S. to destroy itself in the process of destroying Iran, because Iran may not be included in those borders you described geographically, but they do have a government that has an ideology that seeks to confront and challenge Israel and prevent them from accomplishing that, correct?
And it's all going according to plan right now in Iran, because what's been happening these past few months is something called de-basification. Okay, the United States has lots of bases throughout the Middle East, and slowly Iran is destroying these bases. It is ridiculous how fast this process is going, because at the onset of the war, rather than defend their bases, what the United States military did was ask their soldiers to move into hotels and residential compounds. They basically abandoned the bases. And so Iran just kept on attacking these bases. And now what's happened is all the U.S. military is now consolidating within Israel. So they are abandoning their bases in the GCC and moving towards Israel. And so what we're seeing slowly is the merge of CENTCOM and Israel. And it's being supported at a policy level by the NDAA, right? So Congress is voting to authorize the NDAA, which would basically, in effect, merge the Israel and the U.S. militaries. That's not what they would say. They would say, well, this is more about data sharing, information intelligence sharing. But in effect, it would be basically to merge these two militaries, which again goes along the lines of the Great Israel Project. Yeah.
So how could you simply explain this to someone trying to understand how Israel is able to accomplish this? Is Israel and its influence through its agents in the United States like parasites or a virus in a host body directing the U.S. empire and destroying it and like merging with it while simultaneously destroying it in order to supplant it?
Right. So, one thing that people don't appreciate is how corrupt Washington, D.C. is. People don't appreciate this. People think that people in Washington, D.C. are, these policy wonks that come up with ideas on how to maintain national security interests. That's not what they do. Washington is controlled by lobbyists. And the Congress people, the politicians in Washington, D.C., just do the bidding of the highest bidder. It's that simple. It's a very corrupt place. It became even more corrupt after the war on terror started, after 9/11. The military-industrial complex ceased to be about protecting national security and just about trying to pilfer as much taxpayer dollar as possible, right? These forever wars were about transferring American taxpayer money into a transnational elite. So Julian Assange said it best, right? America fights wars not to win wars. The point is to have forever wars, so that this money can constantly be stolen by the transnational elite. The example is go to the suburbs around Washington, D.C., Fairfax, Alexandria, Bethsheba, Bethsheba, and they're all mansions now. The wealthiest county in the United States is Loudoun County, Virginia. 20 years ago, before 9/11, the net per capita income was $30,000 a year, which is about average in the United States. Now it's 3 times as much. Okay, so people don't appreciate that in empire in decline, the elite are only interested in stealing as much money as possible from the nation state. They have absolutely no sense of patriotism. They don't really care about the national security interests of the United States. Some do, but then they're removed from office, like Joe Kent.
I want to return actually to Turkey. So you talked about how Turkey and Israel would essentially carve up the Middle East and divide and
That's
conquer.
what the Clean Break Memo said should happen. And that's what happened when Turkey supported ISIS, right? So al-Sharaa, who is now president of Syria, he's a Turkish client.
So why would Turkey consent to this?
That's a great question. So the behavior of the Turks have been very, very strange because Erdogan has been very critical of Israel, and Israel themselves have threatened Turkey. But at the same time, Turkey supplies a lot of energy to Israel. So if you're really serious and you really believe that Israel was a threat to peace in the Middle East, why not just cut off the oil? That's your main bargaining chip, right? But the reality is Turkey provides a lot of energy to Israel, and it continues to do so. Recently, Israel has been threatening Turkey, and Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister of Israel, and probably the person who is most likely to replace Netanyahu after Netanyahu retires from the world stage, he's saying that Turkey is next. You guys are next. After Iran, you guys are next. And I think yesterday, Israel bombed some Turkish officials in Syria. I'm not sure if you saw the news.
Yeah, they bombed an airport where Turkish officials had been or were going to be. I don't think they killed any Turkish officials, but they bombed an airbase. Yeah.
Okay, right. So if you are Turkey and you see what's happening, I mean, the evidence is very clear that Israel is hell-bent on regional hegemony, and that after Iran, they'll probably go after Turkey. But at the same time, Turkey has been very lackluster in trying to protect its interests. Recently, Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia signed the Mecca Accords. And so now these 3 nations are committed to each other's national security. It's a mutual defense pact. And it seems as though Saudi Arabia will enter the war at some point and send ground troops against the Houthis, in which case Turkey must also send ground troops against the Houthis. So it's a very strange situation that we are in. And I think one possible explanation is the way we understand the Middle East is incorrect. We understand the Middle East as divided amongst competing nation states. But what if there was a force that transcended the nation state and was able to work across borders to implement an eschatological vision? Well, this might have a lot more predictive power. And So I see on the board, you say, you know about Sabbatai Zevi, Jacob Frank, the Dönmeh. Well, so Sabbatai Zevi was a Jewish Messiah, and then he converted to Islam. And the Jews who followed him into Islam are called the Dönmeh. And the Dönmeh are interesting because after the Crimean War, Britain and France took control over the Ottoman economy, the banking system, and they had the Dönmeh basically run the financial system. And then the Dönmeh were the ones who supported the Young Turk Revolution, Ataturk, basically. And so the Dönmeh are extremely influential in Turkey. And these are crypto Jews who practice the Kabbalah. That's Turkey, right? Saudi Arabia is a very interesting story as well, because Saudi Arabia is an artificial creation of the British Empire to counter the Ottoman Empire. And Wahhabism is something that the British Empire promoted, and they brought the House of Saud into power in Saudi Arabia. And there's a lot of speculation that the House of Saud are in fact Dönmeh, that these are crypto Jews. And the same with the UAE as well. So I have no evidence to suggest this. These are just rumors I've heard. But if we just looked at it through that lens, that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, UAE, Israel, all run by Sabbatai Frankists, well, this would make a lot more sense to explain their behavior than, they're just protecting their own national interests.
I've heard these rumors as well, and they're fascinating to me. But like you said, I also couldn't find evidence directly
That's right.
supporting it. There's more evidence for the Dönmeh in Turkey, absolutely.
Well, the evidence for Dönmeh in Turkey is pretty overwhelming.
And there's Jewish scholarship on it as
That's
well.
right, that's right.
It's not like a conspiracy
Right.
theory.
So
Saudi
Saudi
Arabia is less clear.
Yeah, Sabbatai Zevi is a real person, and everything we know about him has been collaborated. The Dönmeh, yes. Ataturk, the Young Turks, absolutely. You go on Wikipedia, they will tell you all of this. But the House of Saud in the UAE, run by crypto Jews, is something that is just rumor. But it's persistent rumors. It's something that's been around for like decades.
Yeah.
And a lot of people believe it. So, have you heard something called the Third Rome Prophecy?
No.
Okay. So we talk a lot about Pax Judaica and the Great Israel Project, okay? But there's another prophecy that's very important in regards to Turkey, and it's called the Third Rome Prophecy. And this has to do with Russia. So the prophecy is promoted by the Orthodox Church, which believes that Moscow will be the third Rome. The first, of course, was Rome. Then you had Constantinople, which is modern-day Istanbul, and the third Rome will be Moscow. And what they say is, once Moscow becomes the third Rome, this will be the last Rome, okay? It will be the forever Rome. And for this prophecy to take place, what Moscow must do is return the Greeks to Constantinople, Istanbul. And so what they predict will happen is this. Erdogan will fall from power, and a new pro-NATO, pro-Western government will take shape. And they will join NATO in the war in Ukraine. And Turkey will blockade the Black Sea because they control the Bosphorus, right? In response, Russia will attack Turkey and overthrow the government and splinter Turkey into different pieces. And Constantinople, Istanbul, will be returned to the Greeks, okay? And this will establish Moscow as the legitimate authority in the Orthodox world. Now, why is this interesting? Because this aligns with the Greater Israel Project. Because the Greater Israel Project also calls for the partition of Turkey in the south. So Russia wants Turkey in the north, and then Israel wants Turkey in the south. So these two nations benefit from working together, right? They benefit the most from having a corrupt elite in Turkey that will obey their commands.
This is a very interesting theory that I haven't heard about, so I need to look into this myself.
Yeah, the Third Rome Prophecy.
I want to transition now back to the accelerationists in Trump's administration. We know obviously that he is very closely connected to Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, a lot of these big tech guys in AI. And we were talking about how this war could accelerate the decline of the empire, which could crash the global economy and produce a lot.
It is crashing the global economy.
It could get a lot worse, though, obviously. And
Yeah.
you talked about all the unemployment. So, and you called it the white collar.
The white collar apocalypse, right?
The
So in
white
the
collar
80s and 90s, America shifted a lot of jobs over to China, right? That was a blue collar apocalypse. Now with this global economy collapsing and with the AI coming into being, then a lot of white collar jobs will be lost. Professional managers will lose their livelihood, yeah.
So this is what I want to focus on now, because we know that these guys, above Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, their thought leaders are people like Curtis Yarvin, Nick Land, and these people have dreams of like destroying the U.S. democracy and it's replacing it with a corporate monarchy
Yes.
where it's just ruthlessly run as a fusion between like hyper technology, racial hierarchy,
Yeah.
and hyper capitalism.
Yeah.
And Curtis Yarvin has like literally said that the plebs will not have work, and they should because they can't be turned into biodiesel, they should just live in a virtual world that gives them meaning and purpose because they're too stupid to attain it on their own.
Right.
So do you view the Iran war and accelerating this global economic collapse as connected to these AI big tech accelerationists that want to just gobble up the rest of the economy for themselves?
Yeah, so it's really interesting in that these different eschatologies do not actually contradict each other, okay? So Russia has a third Rome prophecy, Israel has Pax Judaica, the Great Israel Project. The United States has something called a Technate, okay? So the Technate was something proposed in the 1920s, 1930s. It comes from the Freemason tradition in the United States. And the idea of the Technate is democracy doesn't really work. Why? Because in the long term, democracy leads to political polarization, and you have tribalism come into force. And the only way to run a large society is through technocracy, through technical expertise. Basically, you have engineers run the economy. Think of it as techno-Marxism. Okay? Like that's what they're literally proposing. And what's really interesting is that Elon Musk's grandfather was one of the early proponents of the Technate. And Peter Thiel, the way he thinks, is also consistent with the philosophy of the Technate. And Curtis Yarvin is obviously the grand philosopher of the Technate. So there are lots of data points to suggest that we're moving towards the direction of the Technate. One data point that people don't really appreciate is, why is Trump obsessed with his ballroom, right? So this is like Trump's major obsession. He cares more about his stupid ballroom than he cares about the Iran war. He talks more about this, right? He's always looking at his plans to build this ballroom, an extension of the White House, the West Wing, right? Is it the East Wing or the West Wing?
I'm not sure.
Okay, it's one of the two. But if you look at the plans, it's huge. And also, like, it goes underground a great deal. And recently, I think a federal court said you can't do that. Only Congress has the authority to appropriate funds for this renovation. And then what happened was, during the White House Correspondents' Dinner, there was a shooter, right? And after the shooter was apprehended, everyone in the MAGA world posted, "We need the ballroom now." And we're like, wait a minute, what's the logic here? So Trump was almost assassinated by this crazy guy, and we need a ballroom. And the idea is,
Was their idea the ballroom would be more secure, like this?
yeah. But why is this emphasis on the ballroom? What people suspect is it's not what's in the ballroom that matters. It's what's under the ballroom that matters. And if you look at all the contractors for the ballroom, a lot are contractors who build data centers. So what people suspect is Trump is trying to build a data center under the White House. And why would this be important? Because then the data center would be protected by executive privilege, right? Now Congress cannot possibly ever question what is in those data centers. And you can imagine what's inside those data centers are blackmail files, right? Think of the Epstein island. right? But you don't have to engage in these activities anymore because you have the surveillance state, which is able to really quickly monitor every politician in Washington, D.C., compile a file on these people, and then it would all be controlled by the President of the United States, right? The President of the United States would have, under the White House, his own private CIA, FBI, and NSA. This would be the Imperial Presidency.
And they've talked about potentially giving Peter Thiel control of Washington, D.C. or something like that. I don't know if it was him specifically, but they talked about turning Washington, D.C. into like a corporate-owned entity. Instead of having a civic government, local government run the city, it would be privatized entirely.
So if you look at Palantir, what Palantir does is database analysis, right? So you have all this data across different databases. What Palantir does is compile all this data and then analyzes it. And this is really useful for war because think of how in war you need AI to control the different drone systems in place, okay? But it's actually very crucial for the executive office as well, because now you have access to everyone's data. How do you begin to organize this data, and how do you categorize people, and how do you control people's behavior? So that's what Palantir is designed to do. Palantir is meant to be the all-seeing eye, and basically hear everything you say, and then being able to manipulate you. So that's the grand idea of the Technate, the AI surveillance state.
So this is interesting, obviously, because Palantir is co-founded by Alex Karp and Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is obsessed with the Antichrist. He's going around giving lectures where he projects the coming of a Antichrist figure who will pretend to save humanity, and he's warning people about the Antichrist while he's building the technology that like makes the Antichrist possible. And then, and you talked about like the meta narratives that he buys into, Curtis Yarvin and all these other guys. But then Alex Karp, this guy, like these guys present themselves as like atheist, secular, rationalist, materialist. But then Alex Karp will admit that he practices Kabbalistic numerology.
Yeah.
So these people may not literally believe in the religion, but they still believe in like the meta-narrative ideas. Can you talk a little bit about how that's possible? How can these guys be atheists but still buy into these ideas?
Because they're nerds. They grew up not reading the Bible. They grew up reading Lord of the Rings. They grew up reading Isaac Asimov. They grew up reading science fiction. And so they're trying to achieve a utopia, a technological utopia. And for Peter Thiel, whatever tries to stop him from achieving this technological utopia is the Antichrist, because he's trying to achieve God on earth. And if you're trying to stop him, then you're the Antichrist, right? You're Satan. And so that's what people don't appreciate. You can be atheist and messianic at the same time, right? These science fiction nerds, people who watch Star Trek, like Jeff Bezos, they're messianic. They believe, Elon Musk is like, once we get to the Mars, paradise on Earth. Like, how does that work, right? How is it you get to Mars and then you have complete paradise, you have complete abundance, you never have to work again? You just look at how Elon Musk talks, and he's very messianic. He's saying like, AI technology will usher in an age of abundance where you are now free to do whatever you want. That's how Marx talks, okay? And Marx was not a religious person, but he was a messianic person, right? So that's what people don't appreciate. Just because you're not religious does not mean you're not messianic.
What do you think drives them and motivates them personally? Like, are they just so empathetic and concerned with humanity that they want to usher in this utopia? Or do they sell it as utopia when in reality they want to build an empire submissive to them? Like they have godlike
complex. It's a God complex. It's like they have achieved so much so fast that they believe they are divine figures. Because how else can you, as a human being, rationally explain why you have like tens of billions of dollars and you have so much power? Well, it's because, the universe wants you to become God. And you are designated to lead humanity into utopia. And you will lead humanity into utopia because you've succeeded so much, right? Is this how human psychology works?
So what is it that makes them go beyond this idea? Like they have this God complex, but they also we talked about Curtis Yarvin, but there's also Nick Land, and Nick Land has talked about how, like, in the future there won't even be a need for humanity because of the advancement of technology and the machines. And so, what is the point of ushering in this utopia if the result is that there's no longer a necessity for humankind? It's like they're building this and it's supposedly for humans, but it's not.
Right. So this is a contradiction. The contradiction is they have a God complex because they've achieved so much so fast. But they're very small-minded people. They lack an imagination. Okay? And if you have a God complex but a very limited imagination, you believe that reason must be the operating principle of society. Okay? You believe that if everyone just does what you want, the world will be perfect. And you don't appreciate that human imagination, human diversity, spontaneity is what makes life living. It's what leads to creativity. You don't understand that because you yourself are not that sort of person. So you want to impose your worldview on everyone else. And you want to become yourself the AI that is able to manipulate and control everything else. And AI is the mechanism in which you yourself can become God.
Another thing I've noticed about both Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, you have white supremacists, but then you also have, through Alex Karp, Jewish supremacists. And they are like kind of opposed to each other, but at the same time, they're collaborating with each other to usher in this world together. And so it's a bit of an unholy alliance, but that's something that I've picked up on when I read more and more about their ideas, that it's an unholy alliance between white supremacy and Jewish supremacy.
Let's be clear, okay? It is the Christian Zionists and the Zionists who want to force the coming of the Messiah or the return of the Messiah. They themselves, these technologists, what separates them is they think they are the Messiah. They think that it is their duty to bring about the end of days and the end of the world and utopia. So
When you say the end of the world, do you mean, because a lot of people just imagine an apocalypse that destroys everything, but you mean the end of the world as we know it?
no, the end of history, the end of struggle, the end of conflict, the end of emotion, just the dominance of human reason. So if you look at Freemasonry, okay, their vision for the world is something called the Holy Empire of Reason. And the best way to understand this is imagine a temple, okay, and it's the most beautiful temple in the world. But for this temple to be the most beautiful in the world, each block must be itself perfect, a perfect cube, okay? And it is the duty of every human being to become that perfect cube through self-cultivation, to live a life of pure reason, to be beyond prejudice, to be beyond emotion, to be beyond family, love, tradition, just pure emotion. And what they believe is AI will force us to engage in a spiritual alchemy so that we become pure reason itself. So the point of AI is not to replace humans. The point of AI is to remake humans.
You have explored all these different eschatological prophecies and beliefs, these meta-narratives. So what do you gather, I guess, holistically after zooming out and seeing all these different prophecies and these ideas of secret societies you've investigated? How would you assess all of it? And what do you want the audience to understand about what's happening in the world today and how these meta-narratives trickle down and enter the minds of people who have the wealth and resources to actually act upon them and materialize them into the world?
Yeah. So the first thing people need to appreciate is that as humans, we are first and foremost spiritual beings. We seek answers to three questions: where do we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? And this has been true ever since the dawn of time, and this is true for every culture, for everyone. And once you understand this principle, it's a lot easier to understand the motivations of the people in power. Because even though we believe materialism is the only reality. Deep down in our hearts, we strive for a higher purpose. And so these people in power, after they've obtained so much money, influence, and fame, there's still a void in their heart. And it confuses them. Like, how is it possible to be a billionaire and to have so much power and to be surrounded by beautiful women, luxurious mansions, fawning servants, and yet at the same time, there's a deep void in your heart, a deep longing for meaning and purpose. And I think that's what drives these people. And I think that's the root of all this eschatological fever that we're seeing in the age we're living in. Because never before have so few achieved so much power and prosperity over the many. And they need to make sense of this power. They also need to consolidate this power, and they also need to perpetuate this power. So they want to live forever. That's why they're focused on transhumanism as well as longevity research. They want to exert total domination over society. That's why there's focus on AI and data centers in the surveillance state. And they want to believe their lives have deep meaning. And that's why, Peter Thiel talks about the Antichrist. That's why Elon Musk talks about going to Mars and saving humanity. That's why St. Omen talks about AI as summoning demons. So, so it's not that these people are necessarily special. It's just like they've been put in a very strange situation where they have complete control over millions of people. And it's just absurd. I'm not sure if you heard something called the Stanford Prison Experiment. The Stanford Prison Experiment, where a psychologist at Stanford, he takes a class of Stanford students and he randomly divides them into two groups, prisoners and guards. And these are students, classmates who've known each other for quite some time. They're friends, come from the same background, same demographic, same interests, great affinity for each other. But once you divide them into two groups, you give one group more power than over the other, then what happens is the guards start to abuse their power and they start to torture, abuse, mutilate the prisoners. And that's something that we as a society don't really appreciate, how power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. They've done scientific studies where they just looked at the brains of people in power. And what they recognize is they have brain damage. Their frontal lobes are damaged, so much so that it's damaged. It's damaged to the extent of psychopaths. And so power changes who you are as a person. And it's unfortunate that we as a society, we worship the powerful. We worship the famous and the billionaires because we think they're better than us. And they're not. They got to where they are because of certain circumstances, because of the families they were born into, the people they knew, the circumstances that they were born into elevated them above us. And they think they're better than us, but unfortunately, we also believe they're better than us. And this is what's led to a lot of problems, okay? So first and foremost, we are spiritual beings. That's the first thing I've discovered. Second thing that I've discovered is our conventional way of understanding the world is completely wrong. So in school, and I'm sure you were taught the same thing in school, we were taught that the world is emergent and materialistic, meaning there's a big bang which produced all these particles that coalesce into stars. Then we had planets, and these planets, because of these random environmental factors, there's water, which gives birth to fish, which becomes lizards, and you know the story of evolution, right? And this is what you're taught in school, and this is the dominant narrative. And there are tremendous consequences for defying this sort of narrative. You basically, if you say this narrative is wrong, you're labeled a conspiracy theorist and you're ostracized from polite society. And you're not allowed to graduate from university. You're definitely not allowed a mainstream career. whether in media or science, academia, publishing, corporations. But and I'm a product of the meritocracy. I went to Yale, and for most of my adult life, I believe this narrative. And through a series of accidents, I've come to believe that this narrative is completely wrong. In fact, it's an inversion of the truth. And the truth is the universe is conscious, it is energy, it's vibrations, and we're all part of a divine consciousness. Our consciousness exists on multiple dimensions, and reality is something that we've imagined. Okay, so it's an inversion of what we've come to believe. The elite understand this. We do not. And so the elite appreciate that to control reality, you have to control the imagination of people. And that's why they put so much money into Hollywood, into social media, into narratives. Okay, so that's the second thing I've learned while studying eschatology. And the third thing that I've learned is we humans have never really changed. If you go back 10,000 years, they were also doing eschatology. If you go back 100,000 years, they were also doing eschatology. I think that the dominant narrative of how history has developed is completely wrong. I think that ancient civilizations were just as complex and sophisticated as ours, but their emphasis might be different. So, for example, maybe in our civilization, we are very much focused on technological progress. That's why we have, the internet, air travel, space travel, and all that. But maybe other civilizations were just as advanced, but they might be more focused on telepathy, on spiritual practice. And this helps us better understand how they were able to create things like the pyramids and Stonehenge. Because right now we don't have a theory, a convincing theory as to how the pyramids were created and how Stonehenge was created, how Easter Island came into being. So another thing that I've learned is we humans have infinite potential. It's really about where we choose to focus our energies. Do we focus our energies on material acquisition, or do we focus our energies on spiritual practice?
Going back to the powerful who are building these systems, it's the same three questions. It's where do we come from? Where are we going? What are we doing here? And where are we going?
Yeah.
So that very human, existential
And our
self-reflection.
heart aspires to these three questions. We want to know.
Yeah, and so these guys have the same question. They find themselves in the same position. They just have a lot more wealth and resources, and so they, do what they do in pursuit of their answers to that question. I was going to ask you actually, where do you think we come from? What do you think we're doing here? And where do you think we're going?
Well, I think that we all come from the source. And we are all eternal souls. I see the term transmigration of the soul. And this is a very central idea in all religions, that our souls are eternal. And our souls have come here in order to experience things we cannot experience anywhere else. Because here in this world, we have bodies. And with bodies, you can experience pain and pleasure, which is something you cannot experience in the spiritual realm. And this process allows us to achieve greater wisdom, greater imagination, greater enlightenment than anywhere else. And some see this as a negative thing, where knowledge just leads to pain, and so we're here just to suffer. The Buddhists say this, the Hindus say this, but then there are people who are much more optimistic, people like Dante and Homer, who believe like we're here in order to have experiences that ignite our imagination, which expands the consciousness of the universe. So being human allows us to be co-creators. And I think this is a much more convincing and compelling understanding of the cosmos than the traditional, everything's just random, we evolved from apes, and we're here just to fuck and fornicate and pass on our genes, okay? I think that's much more convincing than the fact that we're just monkeys who want to fornicate and pass on our genes. Um, and so I think that for most of human history, we've appreciated this, and in our lifetimes, the past 100 years, we've completely forgotten our origins, why we're here, where we came from, where we're going. And that's what's made us very unhappy. I mean, two facts, right? The first fact is we're the most technological civilization for the past 10,000 years. Second fact is we are probably the most unhappy civilization in the past 10,000 years. And so how do you reconcile the two? And I think the way you reconcile it is we're just going the wrong way. We're just embracing the wrong values. I have children. When you have children, you recognize that they're not blank slates. In school, I worked as an educator for most of my life, and I believe that children were blank slates. And if you just had good values, good habits, you can implant them on your children, and they would turn out to be perfect. And I tried that with my kids. I have 3 kids, 2 boys and 1 girl, and I recognize that's completely nonsense. They come with their own personalities. They come with their own instincts. They come with their own telos, purpose. They know what they want to do. They know where they're going. They know where they came from. And no matter how hard you try, you can't stop them from doing what they want to do. And if you try very hard, all you do is make yourself unhappy and make them unhappy. So that's something that I've learned as a parent. We're all unique individuals with a divine connection to God. However you want to define God, okay? Whether it's, the source or the monad or God or Allah or Yahweh, doesn't matter. It's the same concept. And we've come here for a particular purpose, and the purpose is to improve ourselves, to seek enlightenment. And where we're going is we're going back to the source, and what we want to do is bring a new set of emotions back to the source so that we can expand the consciousness of the universe.
So you view us as extensions of the universe, experiencing the universe, and then returning to it and contributing new perspectives and information, and that ultimately expands the source.
Yeah. So think of us as fractals, okay? So there's a universe, right? But we're a fractal of the universe. So whatever happens in us happens within the universe. Whatever happens in the universe also happens in us. God is in us, we are in God. And this is a eternal thing. It's like every moment in our lives. So, Immanuel Kant proposed the idea of the categorical imperative. And the idea of the categorical imperative captures this view, okay? So for the categorical imperative, he proposes there must be 3 principles that you must abide by to live the best, most moral, happiest life, okay? The first is to live your life knowing that whatever you do will be emulated, reflected throughout the universe, okay? So today, when you smile, everyone smiles with you. If you get angry, the entire world gets angry with you. So would you rather live in a world where everyone smiles, or would you rather live in a world where everyone is angry? You make that choice, okay? You have the power to make the choice. Believe that whatever choice you make will influence the outcome of the universe, okay? That's number 1. Number 2 is the principle of free will. Everything you do, you must choose to do. Do not believe someone forced you to do it. Do not believe you've been coerced to do it. Do not believe you can coerce others to do what they don't want to do. The principle of free will. Okay? Everything happens because of free will. And whatever choice you make has to be free will. If you force your child to eat a salad, that's not good. Eating a salad is good, but taking away the child's free will is wrong. Okay? And the third thing is to see humans as an end unto themselves. So there are, these moral philosophers who believe, well, you should sacrifice one to save the many. And Immanuel Kant is, that's not how the universe works. In the eyes of God, one is the many. If you sacrifice one to save the many, you are going against God. And if you live by these 3 principles, um, if you believe that whatever you do is a reflection of the universe, if you see yourself as an end unto itself, and if you believe in the doctrine of free will, then you understand the mind of the universe.
Okay, in your opinion, do you think the source is a conscious entity that deliberately created? Extensions or fractals of itself?
Um, I think that's the only way to explain what's going on. You cannot convince me that through just random generation, you're able to create us, right? Even today, scientists can't explain how we have consciousness. They can't explain what consciousness is and what it's doing and how it works. Where are memories stored? Right? We don't know. It's really strange. You would think the most basic question, where are memories stored in the brain? We don't know. We know how we breathe. We know how we see. We know how we touch. We do not know where we store our memories. It's a very strange thing. So it's very hard for someone to convince me God doesn't exist. Because if God doesn't exist, why is there so much beauty in the world? Right? Why is it like every person who sees something beautiful is like, that's beautiful, and you're touched by it, and you're excited by it, and you want to move towards it? Why do people aspire to love? Why do people want to be generous? And why does being generous make you feel so good? Right? So it's very hard to convince me that this is all just random, because just from a game theory perspective, none of this really makes sense. Right? And so I think like there is a God, and if there were not a God, there just couldn't be love, beauty, and truth in the world.
How would you describe consciousness?
So consciousness is the existence of your soul across infinite dimensions and beyond space and time. And all that you're doing with consciousness is using perception to understand the reality around you, and then taking these experiences and feeding it back to your consciousness in order to understand what's going on. So a good analogy is maybe the internet, okay? So to connect to the internet, you have a computer. And there is memory stored within your computer. There's some basic memory stored within your computer. But the true consciousness comes from the internet, okay? And if you think about the internet, there is that individual expression, but it's also mixed in with a multitude of expressions. So it's really interesting. So if I could draw you a graph, what I would do is like I would put in one line infinite human beings, okay? And then the consciousness just expands outward. Okay, it's just expanding outward. And what you'll find is there's a point when the consciousness is unique to you, but then there's a point where the consciousness is combined with another person, and then combined with more people. Okay, and the higher you go up, you eventually reach a point which is infinite, and that is God. And God is the force that combines all of us together. Okay, the point of convergence or imagination is God. And so that's what I think consciousness is. And so, like, the deeper you're able to look into yourself through meditation, through spiritual practice, the more secrets you're able to uncover in the universe.
What do you think the intention is of this source, this creator, this God?
Okay, so different religious practices will say different things, but I think I'm most convinced by Dante, okay, who wrote the Divine Comedy. What he says is this. He says that God is love. The moment that you feel you're in love with someone is the moment you feel intimately connected with God, okay? So love is the God force that permeates the universe and allows unity among all beings in the universe. And that's what gives us meaning, purpose, and structure in life, okay? That's the core of the universe. How the universe expands itself, how the universe knows itself is through the imagination. Okay? So the more you love, the more your consciousness is able to access the universe. And this universal consciousness then is reflected through you onto reality. And this is what drives the human imagination. So the idea is we're here not as a punishment, we're here as a gift from God. And our role, our purpose, our intention is to imagine the best possible world we can construct in this reality. And that's what we should be doing as human beings. We shouldn't be chasing after money. We shouldn't be chasing after pussy. We should be using our imagination to think about what is the best possible world we can create in cooperation with God. And quite honestly, that's what people like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, the Kabbalists, the 17th Strikers, that's what they're doing. But the intention of God is for us to do this together. And
not through force.
that's right? Because the three principles, right? Like, you cannot use humans as a means to an end. They have to be an end unto itself. All humans have free will, and all humans are a reflection of the universe. And so they invert that, right? So these people in charge, they deceive you. They use you as a means to the end, and they perceive you as a slave for their own purposes.
So we've talked about where do we come from? What are we doing here? What do you think happens after death?
So there are things called near-death experiences. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but there are like literally thousands of videos on near-death experiences on YouTube. And what is remarkable is these people come from different cultures. They live very different lives. They do not know each other. They see the same thing over and over, okay? And so what they describe is maybe they get in a car crash, or maybe they get into a swimming accident, okay? And they lose consciousness for a while. And so what happens is they ascend, they leave their bodies, they dissociate from the bodies, and they float up into the ether. And then they're in a realm beyond time and space. So they could be away for years and years, but in our time it could be like a few seconds, okay? And the first thing that happens is a life review, where they examine everything that's happened in their life, and they're able to see and feel all the pain they've caused others. They're able to see and feel all the joy they've caused others. This is a life review. And this is a wake-up call to say, listen, you don't think you matter, but you do matter in the lives of the people around you. And you can choose to do good, or you can choose to do evil. But if you choose to do evil, it will follow you into the afterlife. And then they meet God. And when they meet God, they recognize that God is all loving, all forgiving, all mercy, all generous. And they're just overwhelmed by the idea that at the end of the world, at the end of days, everything will be forgiven, no matter how much evil you've done. And that allows them to forgive themselves and to forgive others. And then God asks them a choice. Do you want to be here, or do you want to return? And they always say, I want to return. Because once you know how the universe works, you have a deep desire to tell others. Okay? And this is very similar to Plato's allegory of the cave, where in a dark cave, prisoners are chained to the ground, and all they see are shadows on the wall, and they think that's reality. But one day a prisoner escapes and goes out into the light and sees the beauty of the world around him or her, and his first thought is, I need to go back and tell others what I've seen. That, I think, is the most human thing, to want to share our joy with others, especially our loved ones. And so that, I think, is how the universe works. The truth is out there. The truth is obvious to us. And once we discover the truth, we can't ever go back. But we want to share it with other people. And unfortunately, people in power recognize that idea, that God is all loving, all merciful, all forgiving, is the most dangerous idea in society. Because think about the world we live in. It's all governed by fear and anxiety, right? Why do we buy things? Because we enjoy buying things? No, it's because of FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. The anxiety, like, if I don't buy this, my neighbor will buy it, and then I'll look bad, right? Then my neighbors will make fun of me. Like, if I don't behave a certain way, then everyone will look down upon me. Okay, it's always my fear and anxiety, and that's how the elite exert control over us. But once you know the truth, all the fear and anxiety goes away. Once you understand death is only a new beginning, you're like, I don't care about dying. I don't care about being poor. I don't care about being hungry. What I care about is living the truth. What I care about is living a life with meaning and significance, and that means helping others and helping to spread the truth.
So going back to the previous question, where do you think we're going? You talked about these near-death experiences. Do you think after death, it is a permanent state of these near-death experiences, where you are essentially no longer bound by space and time, and therefore can, I don't know, go anywhere within human consciousness? Or
So I think that once you die, we enter into a realm of eternity and infinity, meaning this is beyond time and space, and there are infinite possibilities for us to choose from. And this cannot be the only dimension, right? There has to be other dimensions with other experiences. So it's possible we go into other dimensions, but it's also possible that we come back. The reason why we come back is we feel an obligation to our loved ones. We feel an obligation to humanity. So you just think about certain individuals that have existed. They make no sense because they are so removed from the historical context. Like, where did Jesus come from? Where did Muhammad come from? Where did Buddha come from? Right? I mean, given the historical context, we should have people like that. Muhammad was barely literate, right? I mean, was he literate? Maybe not. But he grew up, but he was born, he lived in the Arabian desert. And he became one of the most influential prophets in human history. Same thing with Jesus. Jesus was illiterate. He was born in a very poor family. Um, and you ask yourself, where do these people come from? Because with using our modern psychological tools, we could not possibly predict that they would come in their time, right? So I think the only explanation is they're messengers of God, which is what they said they were, right? We come as a prophet to spread the message of God, and I think that when originally their message was the same, but over time, because of empire, their messages became corrupted. Okay, I think that during the time Muhammad and Jesus were saying the same thing, which is we all come from the source. God loves every one of us. There should be no hierarchy. There should be no inequality. There should be no caste and difference among us. I think that's what every prophet has said. But again, over time, the messages have become very corrupt.
we keep returning to this word, love.
Mm.
What is love?
Um, Love is a feeling of intimate connection with the divine. Okay, which means intimate connection with everyone, everything in the universe. And how you generate love is by focusing your faith, your devotion, and your trust on one person. And it could be a child, it could be your wife, it could be your mother, it could be your best friend. But that's be a person. Okay, it can't be like I love my dog, or I love money, or I love my computer. Okay, or I love Iron Man. It can't be that. It has to be a real person in your life. Why? Because the spark in you, the soul in you, is a real thing, and it glows. And what you want to do is build a connection with another soul. And when these two souls light together, these two souls then reach up and connect to the wider universe. Okay? And so that's what love is. Love is the giving yourself completely to another person with faith, devotion, and trust.
So this is all very fascinating, and I've had these kinds of conversations with all kinds of people, but I love having them over and over and over again as a reminder, but also just to gain more perspective and understanding. And I think for my channel, I think about uh, I created this channel firstly out of passion. I like to learn, and then
Mhm.
what I learn, I just share with my audience.
Yeah.
Now, I've gravitated a lot towards war, geopolitics, because of what's been happening since October 7th, and obviously the Russia-Ukraine war. So I'm interested in these big ideas, but it's not just the chaos of war that interests me. I like to get as close to what I think is the truth as possible. And I think geopolitics helps you understand why things are happening on Earth today more than like mainstream media will tell you, right?
Sure.
But I often think about how I might be spiritually affecting my own audience,
Yeah.
constantly with negativity and not providing solutions or
Yeah.
answers. And I don't have the solutions, I don't
Yeah.
have the answers. But I have thought about, having these sorts of conversations for my audience, and it's going to be different for them. I don't know how much they'll appreciate it, but I definitely benefit from it. And I think we have to uh, be examples for others, and have these conversations, and call others to this kind of enlightenment and awakening. And there's so many different ways to do it. My audience is diverse. There are atheists who follow me, agnostics, Christians, Muslims, even some Jews. So all kinds of people. And so I'm always fascinated and interested in having these conversations. Do you think artificial intelligence can mimic consciousness?
Um, so artificial intelligence is a misnomer. Um, what it really is something called supervised machine learning. And in the very simplistic terms, it's just database management, the ability to like search and sort information. So, for example, facial recognition technology. What is facial recognition technology? All I'm doing is putting all your faces into a database. And what I need to be able to do is differentiate your face. So what I do is I turn your face into a mathematical model. And this mathematical model is unique, so unique that even with a fraction of your face, I'm able to differentiate who you are. Because all I'm doing is trying to figure out who you are in relation to all the other faces in the database, okay? So it's not that complex. I mean, it's really sophisticated, and it's really um, powerful technology, right? Because you have a billion people, and the computer's able to recognize you anywhere at any time in a city, right? But it's not that hard to do. It's all just database management, and all you're doing is sorting information and searching for the information. Okay, the same is true for translation software. The same is true for ChatGPT, but the scale is much greater. Okay, and that's all it is. It's not mimicking consciousness at all. The consciousness is ultimately a connection to the divine. And so, what AI really is the enslavement of humanity, right? Because Elon Musk saying how in the future there'll be robots to do all the work. Um, he's being disingenuous. He doesn't really mean robots will do the work, and then we as humans we get UBI, and we are able to write music and cook and just farm. Okay, what he's really saying is we will become the robot. Okay, we will be the slave class for the elite who the transhumanist technology will be able to live forever, be forever healthy with organ transplants, and just live the happiest lives. That's their vision for the future in
What,
their
what,
hearts.
what do you mean by we will be the robot?
You and I, right? So the idea is,
But you don't mean that we will do the work, right? So,
no. I literally mean we will do the work. We'll become the robots, right? And if we don't become the robots, they'll just kill us off. If you're the elite, okay, and this is pure game theory, you're like, I have all these resources, and then I'm going to use these resources to feed and shelter a population that does nothing for me. Well, why would I allow that? What if you're just going to expand resources? Am I not better off just killing you off? Right? Give me a choice between just killing you today or letting you, for the next 50 years, live off the state. What would I choose? Why would I choose to let you just live off the state for the next 50 years? Right? But if I can turn you into a robot, where you will work really hard for very little wages, well, that makes more sense.
But why do they need human beings to become robots or cyborgs if they're already like making advancements with robots?
Because it's cost efficient, okay? So is it cheaper for me to produce a human being, or is it cheaper for me to produce a robot? It's a lot cheaper for me to produce a human being because all I need is a woman to give birth, right? And all I have to do is feed this woman, right? She's just a womb, and then she gives birth to a child, and then the child. What I would do is basically implant microchips into the child, tattoo the child with barcodes. So, and then what I would do is I would send this child to school. Would send it, and then when the child goes to school, all I would do is use VR technology to brainwash a child to think that he or she is just a robot. And I use AI technology to implant a microchip in the head, and then this AI becomes an angel or a demon to brainwash a child and say, like, go do this, go do that. If you're a child and you're just born with a microchip in your head and you don't know if it's a microchip, you think it's a demon or an angel. You think it's your best friend. You think it's your soulmate. You think it's just your daimon, your inspiration. And the demon says, go and like clean the house for 8 hours really hard. You'll do so and you'll enjoy it.
This idea, by the way, might sound like absurd to the audience, but Musk is already, he owns this company Neuralink, and they're making advancements in these implants.
Yeah. So what people don't appreciate is how expensive a robot is, right? So your cell phone, it's actually really expensive to boost your cell phone because it requires the global supply chain. Your cell phone has a lot of rare earths. It has lithium. It has copper. It has a lot of minerals that you must extract from all around the world. That's very expensive because first you have to extract these resources, and then you have to ship these resources to them, and you have to assemble these resources, okay? That's just a freaking iPhone. A robot is a lot more expensive, right? So a human being will cost me, what, $100 a year? This machine will cost me $10,000 a year. So as an elite, right? Why would I invest all this money and resources in building robots that may or may not work when I can just enslave a human being? It's pure logic.
Let's just imagine this. So these chips placed, a neural implant placed into a child at birth.
Yeah.
Is this supposed to give control, like surveillance over their thoughts? What are we imagining here that the technology in the brain can do to the child as they grow up to turn them into human robots, like you're discussing?
Okay. Do children have imaginary friends? Do children have dolls? Do children, when they watch movies, have idols that they worship? Same concept here, right? Right? All you're doing is you're creating a role model for the child, and it becomes like a personal god to the child. And the child grows up worshiping and obeying this god.
And then that is like a hallucinogenic experience produced by like this neural implant, maybe?
Everything is a hallucination, right? Like, why are we chasing money? Money's a hallucination. Do you think money is real? Do you think when, in your bank account it says $5 million, do you think that actually exists? No, it's just a number on a screen. And at any point, it could be deleted, okay? Everything's a hallucination. What's the difference between that and a child thinking, oh, like my doll speaks to me and is a demon or an angel?
So going back to consciousness, you talk about it being a relationship with the divine, essentially, and it's not bound by time and space.
Yeah.
This is different than the idea that scientists or materialists have. That argue their pursuit is to try and discover how consciousness is materially produced in the flesh of the human brain.
And they can't do it.
But they can't do it. And your argument is that because consciousness is outside of time and space, and it's outside of our bodies even.
Yeah, they cannot do it. They cannot replicate it. Okay? So consciousness is about connecting to other dimensions. And an AI by definition cannot do that because an AI is materially bound. It's all just material. There's no spiritual energy to it. right? The only spiritual energy is our consciousness. So if they're able to direct our consciousness from the divine to the material, that would give life to AI. And that's why they would want to use Neuralink to control our minds, because they want to be able to direct our consciousness.
So I'm doing this AI script I told you about. I want to do a documentary on AI. And I don't make the argument that it is literally the Antichrist or the Dajjal. I do tease the possibility that it could be a tool of the Antichrist or bring about the material conditions in which an Antichrist could rise within the world. And I try to tell that story through the lens of Christian and Islamic eschatology, but I also tease the idea that it's essentially a meta-narrative that even those who are not religious, but maybe interested in like science fiction, still imagine and warn about. They're different languages warning about the same thing. So the Matrix, Big Brother, the Dajjal, Antichrist, what it comes down to, like when religious people, Muslims or Christians, imagine the Antichrist, they imagine an actual like physical being. Maybe it's a disbeliever is actually written on his forehead and he has like magical powers, right? But ultimately, what the Antichrist is, if you want to just break it down to its essence, it's a warning of total control and submission and the dehumanization of us. We're supposed to submit to this power that controls everything about us. And you've talked about the mark of the beast, being able to control your ability, surveilling your thoughts, controlling your ability to conduct commerce. So a lot of the ideas we've discussed today, I think, have expanded my ideas a little bit about what to approach and how to
You know what
communicate
the
the
end
subject.
game is? Like if you're Jeff Bezos, if you're Thiel, Sam Altman, if you're just a billionaire or trillionaire, the end game is this, okay? You look at the world and you think the world is too chaotic. It's too messy. It's too unpredictable, okay? And you don't like that because you're a billionaire and you want control. So what do? Well, first thing you do is you have to kill off most people. You need to reduce the population from 8 billion to about 500 million. 500 million is ideal, okay? That's step number one. Step number two is population replacement, meaning you can't have these loud, aggressive Americans mucking things up, okay? They're too rebellious, they're too independent. So what do? Well, you replace Western civilization with people from India because there are lots of Indians, and they have a caste system, so they're pretty obedient, right? If you told an Indian, listen, if you want to come to America, we need to microchip you, we need to control you, they would agree, right? They wouldn't resist. Whereas if you try to tell an American, hey man, we need to microchip you, you have an armed insurrection. So you need war, chaos, and revolution and destruction to reduce the population and then replace the population, okay? That's step number two, population replacement. Step three is the AI surveillance state. Why are there so many data centers in the United States? It's amazing. I'm from China, okay? We have an AI surveillance state, and I'm shocked and disgusted by the amount of surveillance in the United States. Americans don't appreciate how much surveillance there is in the freaking United States. I'm working on my iPhone. My iPhone is always listening to me, always knows where I am, and always wants access to all my other apps. That's ridiculous. We don't have this in China, man. So the amount of data that is being collected on a person is just off the charts. And that's why there's all this investment in data centers. Okay, so that's number three, the AI surveillance state. And then number four is the creation of a new religion to explain and legitimize this new system, right? And it's probably an AI god. And Joe Rogan said this on a podcast, right? Jesus will return as an AI. Okay? And then you have total submission. And when the world is reordered, it'll be perfect because everyone will do as he or she is told. There'll be no more hunger. Because there's only 500 million people and there's lots of resources to go around. Everyone will be obedient, so there'll be no more war, no more conflict, no more argument, no more debate, and the world will be perfect. And the elite can just, practice transhumanism, and they'll live forever, and they will be the guardian kings of society. That is the end game. That's what they want to achieve. And the AI surveillance state is just a mechanism or tool to get to where they want the world to be.
Couldn't they encourage Americans to submit to this kind of system simply through convenience? Isn't that kind of one of the objectives, to just make things more and more convenient, and that is what ultimately makes you kind of submit to something that you otherwise would have revolted against because it's just so convenient?
It's too hard. It's too expensive. It requires foresight. It requires competence. And unfortunately, the elite are not very competent. Okay, so like ChatGPT it really sucks, man. Right? So like, yeah, you could spend years and years and trillions of dollars in trying to make ChatGPT really efficient. Or you could just force people to use ChatGPT because it's a monopoly, right? So it's always the path of least resistance for these guys. These guys aren't that bright, right? What are you talking about? Like, creating a system that is so attractive that people just naturally obey. That's the ideal scenario. But it's too hard to do. It's too long. It's cost too much. And they probably can't even do it.
And what about the population size? So 8 billion sounds like a lot, but the Earth is proven itself to be capable of supporting so much life. So why is it that they consider, like, why is there a need to reduce the population from 8 billion to 500 million? Is there not enough food for everyone, especially if they automate more and more of civilization, every aspect of it, from agriculture to satellites and technology? Is it a matter of producing food? Is it energy?
Yes.
What is
So this is a misconception, okay? If you just grow food naturally, the planet can basically support 1 to 2 billion people, 2 billion people at most. The reason why we can now support 8 billion people is cheap energy. Basically, Middle East oil. It's really cheap. It's really abundant. And from Middle East oil, we're able to produce the conveniences of modernity, which include plastics and fertilizer, especially fertilizer. Okay, so if you go to Africa, most of the population, most of the food is being produced by fertilizer. That's why we think that maybe in a year's time, as the Strait of Hormuz crisis becomes worse and worse, you will start to see a food crisis emerge in Africa. Basically, people are going to starve, which will lead to revolution, which will lead to migration into Europe. Okay, so in other words, the world that we live in is very precarious. It is entirely predicated on access to cheap energy. But access to cheap energy itself is predicated on world peace. Okay? As long as people are willing to trade peacefully, then we can support 8 billion people. The moment there's war, global supply chain networks break down, and you will have countries that will starve. Okay? So, in other words, the elite are not trying to precipitate global collapse. The elite understand global collapse is inevitable. And what they're trying to do is accelerate the process so it's less painful for everyone. And by accelerating the process, they can also emerge still on top. They can control the process of collapse. It's managed decline. Okay, the WEF keeps on using the phrase managed decline or the Great Reset. This is the age we're living in. If you just talk to any scientist, anyone who knows what's going on, they're like, listen, guys, these wars were gonna happen anyway. This collapse, these famines were gonna happen anyway. Population decline was gonna happen anyway because we went way beyond our capacity. We got really lucky. Okay, think about how fortunate we as a species have been for the past 30, 40 years. Global peace everywhere. Okay, that's number one. But number two is, what's really unusual is no real environmental catastrophe. This is pretty unique, right? No sudden shift in weather patterns, so like you have food shortages around the world. Because once you have a breakdown in one part of the world, it cascades everywhere else. So we've been extremely fortunate these past 30, 40 years. But if you're a member of the elite, you're like, well, this can't last. And these past 30, 40 years have, first of all, greatly expanded our population, but it's also built complacency into us, where it's also made us extremely arrogant, where 1 billion Chinese who have absolutely no business living a modern Western lifestyle believe they are now that they now have the right and the privilege to live a modern Western lifestyle, which puts even greater strain on the environment, right? So the peasants have become uppity. They've become unruly. So this was going to happen sooner or later. The elite just wants it to happen on their terms, at their pace.
You described it as less painful as it possibly can be. What does that look like?
As quickly as possible.
Vaporized in a nuclear explosion?
Well, that would be pretty painless, yeah.
I want to ask you about the concept of money. So Elon Musk recently talked about how soon money as we think of it will no longer exist as a concept because of the abundance produced by automation and AI.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking, and I think I may have shared this with you the last time we had an interview. It's been a while now, I forget. But we talked about like the irrational levels of investment in AI, or at least it seems irrational.
Yeah.
And everyone's asking like, when is it supposed to turn a profit? If, Elon Musk is telling the truth, my theory is that they don't care about the level of investment they're making because these are digital numbers that's produced by the Federal Reserve that's inflating anyway. And he's talking about pretty soon it won't even exist anymore.
That's right.
So they're investing make-believe money
Yeah.
to own infrastructure, and the infrastructure is what matters. So they're not investing all this money for profit. They're investing for a final seat at the table, the final table, this new world order they're building that AI is going to be so important to. What do you think?
Okay. So, let's go back to a more simple time, okay? And this is like the first organized society. And why is the society being organized? In order to like create canals, irrigation, okay? Because that's what allows you to grow the population. That's what allows people to get fed, okay? So you are now having people shifting from the fields to work in digging canals and irrigation channels. And so what you do is you pay them. And how do you pay them? You give them ration cards. Okay, so if you go to Samaria, we have these clay tablets that are really ration cards. And these ration cards, like if you work for us, we'll give you this ration card, and you're able to exchange this ration card for wheat, for bread to feed your family, and for beer as well. And this is the first concept of money, okay? So what is important is that ration card by itself does nothing, okay? What you use this ration card to do is to extract someone's labor, right? As long as that person needs that ration card, wants that ration card, is that ration card valuable, right? So in our time, we find these ration cards, we're like, what is this crap, right? 1,000 years from now, a new society like could find Fort Knox and like billions and billions of dollars, right? They're like, what is this crap? Is it toilet paper? Well, what is this crap? Okay, it's absolutely useless to people. So that's the first thing you need to appreciate. Money is the concept that we've created in order to extract someone's labor and energy for society purposes. Okay, and money today is no different from a rational card, right? But it's just much more flexible. Rather than just buy food, you can also buy other stuff as well. It's universal, and it's very flexible. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is, ration cards can be printed infinitely. When you do that, you destroy the economy, and this is the world we're living in today. All right, so let me ask you a simple question. You're a bank, okay, and depositors put $1 million into your bank. I'm an entrepreneur, and I say I need $1 million to open a restaurant. Can you lend me the money? You're like, okay, well, you're a trustworthy guy and you work hard, so yeah, I'll lend you the money. $1 million of deposit money goes in the bank, then $1 million leaves, and I take it to open a restaurant. Let me ask you this question. How much money do you have right now in the bank? Wrong. $2 million, okay? And the reason why is the banking system was created in Venice, and the main currency was gold, of course. All right, so what would happen is I would put $1 million worth of gold into the bank, and then you would use this money in order to finance trade, exploration. Okay, so I'm a merchant. I need $1 million of gold, And you're like, sure, okay? The problem is that if I take this gold, I could lose it or someone could steal it from me. It's very dangerous, okay? So you're like, rather than me give you gold, I'm gonna give you a receipt for this gold so that you can come and collect it at any time. I'm like, fine, I'll take that, okay? So what's happened is you give me the receipt and you still have $1 million of gold in your vault. Now, when it comes to like record keeping, accounting, how do you define my receipt, right? Is it an asset or is it a liability? If it's a liability, that makes no sense because then you have no money in your bank, okay? But you know you have $1 million of gold already in your bank. So what you do is you define it as a asset. So in other words, each and every bank has a capacity to print money infinitely. Does that make sense? Okay, but here's the problem. Okay, this is what people don't appreciate. If you can create money infinitely, you need mechanisms to destroy money. Otherwise, you have too much money in the system, right? It's like going back to the Samaritan example where you have like too many ration cards. In which case, like no one has to work. People can just like give ration cards to their family, and like no one has to work. But you don't have enough food to feed people. Okay, so you need a mechanism to destroy this wealth. And the two major mechanisms are financial collapse. Okay, so it's really important for people to appreciate. Financial collapse does not happen organically. It's triggered by cartels that need to reduce liquidity in the system. And the other mechanism is war. Okay, because war is the easiest way to destroy wealth. Right, and it's to disguise the fact that there's just too many rational cards in the system. Right, so we've reached. So does that make sense? Is all this making sense? So what Elon Musk is really saying is, okay, so what Elon Musk is really saying is we've got too much liquidity in the system. And this is why young people don't work, right? Because like their parents are baby boomers, and their parents have like $5 million in the bank. So they're like, well, if my parents have $5 million in the bank, I don't need to go work in a factory to like save up capital. I can just go and gamble on cryptocurrency. I can just go and study Andrew Tate, right? Okay, and so what he's saying is money as a mechanism of control no longer works, right? Because again, money is a mechanism to extract labor and energy from you. But if young people refuse to work, obviously money doesn't work anymore. So I need to create really quickly a new mechanism in order to extract labor and energy from people. If it's not money, then another possibility is artificial intelligence, right? And that's why I'm willing to spend all this money in developing AI data centers, because that's my best shot at maintaining control over people and extracting labor and energy from people. Okay, that's what he's really saying.
The way I interpreted it was the same way thinking about the concept of money, the point of it, and how people earn it, and then what they do with it. But if artificial intelligence if AI is going to take a lot of the paper pusher jobs, the white collar jobs, software development, so much of the society is being laid off already, and then you have physical automation. Like if Uber shut down tomorrow, like half the economy in the United States would collapse because everyone is either working, Uber as a second job or like it's their primary full-time gig. And so you have the gig economy. But a lot of the gig economy is going to be gobbled up by automation and AI. And so that means people will stop earning money. And so the way I understood it was that money will no longer be something that you can earn. It'll just be a credit given to you in exchange for your submission.
Yeah, I don't think this is how it works. I don't think they can afford millions of people to sit around. Okay, like that's just a recipe for a disaster.
But that's the entire point of like the virtual world, right? Like the Matrix, the just constant entertainment. Like I agree with you. People sitting around, I mean, there are studies on it. Like people become alcoholics, they engage in domestic abuse, there's more violence. So people can't sit around. Eventually the violence will be inflicted on the state or the system.
That's right.
So but if you pacify them, like if people are just using sex robots and they're just on OnlyFans all day and it's just constant entertainment, it'll be like, have you ever seen that film Idiocracy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like low IQ retards just constantly consuming and entertaining themselves.
That's assuming a world of abundance. That's assuming a world of cheap energy. But now that you have this war in Iran,
So you think like when Elon Musk talks about abundance, that's not actually going to happen?
no, there's no way. There's no way. The plan that they're forced to implement is to send people off to die in war, or to ignite a civil war that kills off the most aggressive members of the society. That's the only way around this, right? You cannot wait for a revolution to overwhelm you, okay? So let's just say you have 10 million people, 10 million guys just sitting around doing nothing. They're on OnlyFans, they have sex robots, okay? But can you guarantee an adequate food supply that will make them content? Probably not. At some point, you're going to have an environmental catastrophe, and then the food's going around, in which case, what happens? They come with their pitchforks. They come with their guns, right? So you can't allow for this lake of gasoline to blow up on you. So what do? We send off these people to die off in war. You establish an empire in Latin America. You send them off to be colonial administrators. And if they want to genocide the population, let them genocide the population. Who cares? Okay, you send them off to the Middle East. Who cares? Okay, but you cannot allow 10 million guys to sit around in the United States doing nothing. You just can't allow it. There's no way they will allow it.
So let's wrap up this conversation with two final predictions.
Okay.
One focus solely on the Iran war,
Yeah.
and then the other on humanity in general over the next 10 years, let's say.
Okay.
With all these converging forces and all these major global events. So let's start with the Iran war.
I think the United States will be forced to use ground troops in Iran. I think there's no way around it. I think that the United States will try to figure out every possible alternative, including using proxies, like the Kurds, the Balochs, the Azerbaijans. They will try to draw in proxy states like Azerbaijan or Turkey or UAE. None of this will work because why am I going to go die for the United States, right? If I'm a Kurd, I'd rather just steal your money and your guns, right? I'm happy to work with you guys. I'm happy to like be bribed by you guys. I'm happy to like take your guns and your weaponry, but I'm not going to go kill myself in Iran, right? When I go off to Iran, I know what the plan is. The plan is to draw the IRGC, right? And then the United States military, the Navy, the Air Force comes in and bombs everyone, including the Kurds, right? There's no precision striking in a war. Everyone dies. So if you're a Kurd, you're like, screw that, man. I'm much better off cheating the United States than I am being loyal to the United States. What do I get from being loyal to the United States? Okay, so you've got all these proxies, proxy militias, proxy states that are just going to continue to rip off the United States. It is a black hole. They're going to sink money in, and at the end of the day, the United States is like, man, we have absolutely no choice. They have to use their own ground troops, in which case they are forced to call up a national draft. Okay, that's my first prediction. All right, the United States will try to figure out we'll try to use as many cheap ways to get out of this war as possible. None of them will work. They'll just dig a bigger hole, and they'll be forced to send in ground troops. In which case, the empire dies. Okay, that's my first prediction. Humanity in general, I think there will be a major geophysical event within the next 5 years.
What?
Geophysical event.
Geophysical event.
And the idea is you know the poles, right? The magnetic poles. There's an excursion. They will move. If they move, what happens is this will weaken the magnetic shield that protects the Earth from solar radiation. Do you know what happens when solar radiation hits the Earth? All these data centers, your electronics, boom.
So you're talking about a naturally occurring electromagnetic pulse kind of event that fries.
EMP. Yeah,
it fries a lot of technology.
Yeah, it's called a Carrington event, and it's happened before. And right now the entire world is...
So you're not talking about the poles shifting completely. You're just talking about
an excursion.
Just moving.
Yeah.
Just moving a single
An excursion is enough to weaken the magnetic field enough to allow for solar radiation, a solar flare, okay? And it's a very low probability, but like considering how digitalized the world is, an event like that would be devastating. And I think this will happen within the next 5 years.
5 years?
Within the next 5 years, yes.
Why do you think 5 years?
Because we're due for an environmental catastrophe. It's just the law of
But are there any indicators that lead you to believe like it could be 5 years, or is there like a previous event?
Yeah,
Like
there
why
are things like the
5 years?
southern anomaly, where the magnetic field is very weak. It seems the magnetic field is weakening very, very rapidly. At the same time, we are building more and more data centers. So it's almost like we are just, you know, um, driving 100 miles per hour with our eyes closed towards a cliff.
So it sounds like your advice would be learn how to grow food on your own, learn how to survive on your own. Is that what you're saying?
You will not survive on your own. What you need to do is
Is
engage.
die fast.
Excuse me?
Die fast.
Well, yeah, sure. No, what you need to do is engage in deep spiritual practice. Come to terms with God. Come to terms with yourself. Whoever you are, whatever thing you've done, just forgive yourself and get ready for what's about to come. And teach yourself true knowledge. Like, learn what's going on and inform others and help others. What you have to do is transform yourself so that you can transform others. What you need to do is rebuild yourself so that you can build a community. And that's the best way to survive what's going on. Listen, if I took 50 guys, okay, and I just dumped you on an island, I guarantee you, if you guys work together, you will survive and thrive. Right? You may not know how to cook, you may not know how to kill animals, but if I dump you guys on an island, I guarantee you, you'll figure out how to survive and how to thrive. And that's what makes humans special. Okay, so as long as you're willing to work with other people, as long as you're willing to put aside your fear, put aside your ego, and commit to others, you'll do well.
Well, Professor Jiang, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm sure the audience will have many questions and comments. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today to discuss these ideas. We went from Iran to the Dönmeh to Messianic ideas. So always a fascinating conversation with you. Tell us what's next for you. I know that you've been traveling, making the rounds here in the United States, doing different podcasts, but we talked before about your plans to continue education in a new way, in your own way. So tell us what's next for you.
Yeah, so I feel my main mission is to speak the truth, to spread awareness, and to promote a spiritual awakening. And so it's early days, but I've just been going around the United States doing podcasts, doing meetups with my subscribers, and I'm just overwhelmed by the positive response to my messaging. So I will just continue doing what I do. I'm a very intuitive person. I don't really plan ahead. I just do what I think is right. So in the next year or two, I'll probably travel all around the world. I plan to go to Malaysia, Poland, Athens, Germany, a lot of places, and to study, to learn more about these countries, but also to meet more people. And hopefully, I'm able to build a network of schools that become sanctuaries or refuges for people who want to engage in spiritual practice.
And what does that spiritual awakening or practice look like in your mind?
Individual empowerment, the recognition that you don't have to rely on others to seek truth. You yourself are connected to God, and you yourself have the capacity to learn every truth for yourself if you have the will and desire to do so.
Okay, I look forward to seeing what you bring to life. Again, we appreciate you as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Amat.
Trust nothing. No